Early 1944, right field Dayton, Ohio, a cold wind whispered across the runway as sunlight caught the polished wings of a P-51 Mustang waiting at the end of the strip. Inside the cockpit, a test pilot adjusted his oxygen mask and eased his gloved hand onto the throttle. Every dial in front of him measured the edge of possibility. Engineers watching from the ground knew they were about to witness something that might redefine the limits of flight. The Merlin engine growled as he advanced the throttle beyond its standard war emergency setting. Boost pressure surged, 70 inches, 75. The sound deepened into a roar that made the concrete vibrate. The aircraft leapt forward, propeller spinning in a silver blur, exhaust flames flickering pale blue in the morning light. At 25,000 feet, the Mustang sliced through the sky at 448 miles per hour. Not a record for a jet, but for a piston engine fighter in 1944, it was nearly unbelievable. The radio crackled as the pilot's calm voice reported his readings. Down below, the engineers exchanged quiet glances. They understood exactly what those numbers meant. The difference wasn't a new engine or a secret aerodynamic tweak. It was the fuel. In the tanks of that Mustang burned a new experimental blend. Grade 150 aviation gasoline, dyed a vivid purple for identification. That liquid represented the highest chemical achievement of Allied industry, a fuel so powerful it would push the limits of every aircraft that touched it. Until that moment, Allied fighters had relied primarily on 130-grade gasoline. It was excellent by the standards of the early war, good enough for the Battle of Britain, good enough for Tunisia and Sicily. But 150-grade fuel was something else entirely. Its detonation resistance was unmatched, allowing engines to run at higher boost pressures without destroying themselves. In a world of pistons and propellers, that difference translated directly into speed, climb, and combat power. The Luftwaffe had no idea what was coming. Their best fighters, the Messerschmitt Bf-109G and the Focke-Wulf 190A, could reach roughly 400 miles per hour at altitude. Against a standard Mustang, that was competitive. Against a Mustang running on purple fuel, it was suicide. The story of how the Allies achieved that advantage begins long before the first Mustang ever flew. It starts with the work of chemists and engineers in laboratories far from the front lines, men who understood that wars could be decided as much by refinery columns as by guns or wings. Octane rating, the measure of a fuel's ability to resist detonation, had been a technical curiosity before the war. In civilian engines, even moderate octane ratings were sufficient. But as aircraft engines grew more powerful, compression ratios rose, and so did the demand for fuels that could survive inside them. When a low-octane mixture ignited prematurely, it produced detonation, uncontrolled explosions that hammered pistons, cracked cylinder heads, and sometimes tore engines apart mid-flight. To climb higher, to go faster, to carry heavier loads, aircraft needed fuel that would hold together under immense pressure. That simple requirement transformed into one of the most complex chemical engineering challenges of the 20th century. In 1940, American aviation gasoline rarely exceeded 87 octane. That was fine for trainers and transport planes, but utterly inadequate for frontline fighters. The British, fighting for their survival against the Luftwaffe, knew this all too well. Through frantic collaboration with American oil companies, they managed to develop 100-octane fuel just in time for the Battle of Britain. The difference was immediate and profound. Spitfires running the new fuel gained more than 30 miles per hour at altitude and could climb hundreds of feet per minute faster. German pilots who had once dominated the air suddenly found their advantages erased. The lesson was simple but brutal. Chemistry could save a nation. That success led to the next leap, 130-grade fuel, which became the backbone of Allied air power through 1943. It powered everything from Spitfires to P-38 Lightnings, from P-47 Thunderbolts to the Merlin-engined Mustangs. Behind that development stood General James Doolittle, the same man who had led the daring Tokyo raid in 1942. Long before his fame as a combat commander, Doolittle had been a pioneer of aviation fuel research. In the 1930s, he campaigned tirelessly for higher octane gasoline, arguing that future engines would depend on it. His foresight ensured that, when war came, the United States had both the industrial capacity and the scientific knowledge to produce it. By 1943, 17 Allied refineries were manufacturing high-octane aviation gasoline using catalytic cracking. a process perfected by French engineer Eugene Houdry. Catalytic cracking allowed refineries to break down heavy hydrocarbons into lighter, more energy-dense molecules. The result was an explosive leap in fuel quality and quantity. The numbers were staggering. By mid-war, American refineries were producing millions of gallons of aviation gasoline every month, enough to feed bomber fleets that stretched across continents. Germany, by contrast, relied on synthetic fuel derived from coal through the Bergius and Fischer-Tropsch processes. Technically ingenious, yes, but slow, expensive, and resource-hungry. Even at peak output, German plants could not supply more than a fraction of the high-octane fuel the Allies enjoyed. Most Luftwaffe aircraft burned B4 fuel, roughly 91 octane. Their premium grade, known as C3, reached perhaps the equivalent of Allied 110 or 115 grade fuel, but production was limited. No matter how well German engineers built their aircraft, their engines were prisoners of inferior chemistry. The key to the Allies' success lay in one word: detonation resistance. Octane rating measures how far an air-fuel mixture can be compressed before it explodes on its own. Pure iso-octane, the reference standard, is defined as 100 octane. Beyond that point, chemists speak not of octane, but of a performance number, how much greater pressure the fuel can withstand compared to iso-octane. A performance number of 150 means the fuel can survive 50% more compression before pre-igniting. Creating such a fuel demanded precision on a molecular level. Chemists added anti-knock compounds like tetraethyl lead, mixed aromatic hydrocarbons such as toluene and xylene, and adjusted every variable from volatility to density. Each batch required meticulous blending and constant testing. By early 1943, both British and American researchers had produced small experimental quantities of what they called 150-grade fuel. The term was more symbolic than literal. It did not mean a true octane rating of 150, which was chemically impossible, but rather a fuel with that performance number under rich mixture conditions. On the lean mixture scale, it still measured 100 octane, ensuring safe cruising efficiency. The new fuel was dyed a deep purple for identification, and pilots soon nicknamed it purple gas. Throughout 1943, test engines ran on dynamometers for hundreds of hours. The results astonished even seasoned engineers. A Packard-built Merlin Phys 1650-7 engine, standard in the P-51 Mustang, normally produced around 1,490 horsepower at military power, using 130 grade fuel. On the purple blend, it delivered over 1,700 horsepower. That extra 200 horsepower came without changing a single component of the engine. Only the fuel. At higher altitudes where thin air robbed engines of oxygen, the results were even more impressive. Manifold pressure readings climbed to 75 inches of mercury without detonation, far beyond what earlier fuels could tolerate. For the pilot, that translated into faster climbs, tighter turns, and higher top speeds, advantages that could decide life or death in seconds. Flight testing at Wright Field confirmed the theory. Every aircraft that ran on the new fuel, from Spitfires to Thunderbolts to Mustangs, showed marked performance gains. The effect was so dramatic that some engineers initially worried the data were flawed. But repeated tests left no doubt. The fuel worked. Introducing it to combat units, however, was another matter. The supply chain had to be carefully managed, and logistics planners had to ensure the new fuel wouldn't be mixed with older grades. Only a handful of fighter groups in England received it at first. In early 1944, the 8th Air Force was losing bombers at a rate that threatened the entire daylight campaign. Even with P-51 escorts, German fighters continued to exact a heavy toll. What Allied planners needed wasn't merely range, it was dominance. They needed fighters that could chase, catch, and destroy German interceptors outright. The arrival of 150-grade fuel promised exactly that. In May 1944, the first operational shipments reached airfields across southern England. Distribution began quietly. A few squadrons received the new fuel for evaluation. Others continued using 130 grade until results were confirmed. By June, just as the Normandy invasion began, the transformation was underway. Mustangs fueled with the purple blend now patrolled the skies above the beaches, their engines running smoother and stronger than ever. German pilots quickly noticed the difference. Intercept reports described American fighters accelerating away with impossible ease, climbing faster and refusing to stall even at extreme altitudes. To the Luftwaffe, it seemed as if the Americans had conjured an entirely new generation of aircraft overnight. Intelligence officers dismissed the reports as exaggerations. Exhausted pilots, they reasoned, were misjudging speed and distance in the chaos of combat. But the reality was brutally simple. The Americans had changed the chemistry of war. The fuel's first true trial came not over Normandy but against a new menace, the V-1 flying bomb. The pulse-jet drone screamed toward London at more than 400 miles per hour, low to the ground, too fast for most fighters to intercept. Standard Mustangs and Spitfires could barely match their speed at sea level, but with 150-grade fuel, Allied pilots suddenly found themselves with a crucial margin of advantage. On June 18, 1944, Major R.E. Turner of the 356th Fighter Squadron used that margin to perform one of the strangest kills of the war. Instead of shooting down a V-1, he tipped its wing with his own, sending it tumbling out of control. The maneuver required precision measured in inches, and the speed to catch the target in the first place. Without the new fuel, it would have been impossible. As more squadrons converted, the reports multiplied. American fighter groups found themselves dictating the pace of every engagement. German pilots who once attacked bomber formations and escaped unscathed now found Mustangs chasing them down even after steep dives. Their traditional advantage in acceleration and roll rate evaporated. To the Allies, it was a quiet revolution. No new airplane, no new weapon, just chemistry. And yet, chemistry was enough. The men who fought in those skies rarely thought about refinery processes or aromatic hydrocarbons. They simply knew their aircraft responded with new life, pulling harder, climbing faster, and running cooler even at maximum power. Maintenance crews noticed the differences too. Spark plugs fouled more quickly, engine wear increased, and lead deposits built up faster. But the trade-off was worth it. Every extra mile per hour meant another bomber saved, another pilot returned home. The Luftwaffe never fully understood what had happened. Some analysts suspected higher quality fuel, but by the time they confirmed it through captured samples late in 1944, it was too late. German industry could not replicate the formula. Their synthetic plants, already crippled by bombing raids, lacked both the materials and the capacity to produce equivalent performance fuel. For American and British airmen, the purple gasoline became a symbol of unseen power, proof that wars could be won not only by courage but by chemistry, by the relentless collaboration between scientists, engineers, and industry. By the summer of 1944, as Allied bombers darkened the skies over France and Germany, the Mustang had become more than just a fighter. It was a machine operating at the absolute limits of piston engine performance, limits made possible by what flowed unseen through its fuel lines. The colour purple would never mean the same again. By midsummer 1944, the transformation was complete. Across the English countryside, drums stencilled, 150 grade, handle with care, gleamed under the rain. Inside each was the liquid proof that industry could tip the scales of a global war. Tankers carried it to forward depots, fuel trucks rumbled down narrow lanes to dispersal areas, and ground crews in stained overalls siphoned it into fighters that would change the character of combat over Europe. The 8th Air Force had entered that summer exhausted. Losses from earlier raids still haunted briefing rooms. Every daylight mission into the Reich demanded courage and mathematics. Formation spacing, altitude, escort range predicted casualties. When the purple fuel reached operational strength, the numbers began to shift. At first, only a few squadrons received it. Supply officers guarded every barrel. Pilots were briefed in hushed tones about new manifold pressure limits and the dangers of overboosting. Then, the results spoke louder than any memo. Engines ran hotter but stronger, and climbs once measured in patience now took seconds. Combat reports began to show phrases that intelligence officers underlined: could not escape, accelerated past FW190, closed with ease. The Luftwaffe, already bleeding from every front, now faced an enemy whose machines behaved as if gravity itself had changed. Experienced German aces noticed it first, the sudden impossibility of disengaging. A Mustang that should have fallen back in a shallow dive was now still there, guns flashing. A roll meant to open distance now bought only seconds. Allied radio traffic told the other side of the story. Calm voices calling, bandit breaking left, I'm still with him, and laughter when the chase ended in fire and smoke. Behind those clipped transmissions lay chemistry more decisive than any new wing design. As the Allies broke out of Normandy, the purple-fueled Mustangs extended their reach beyond the beachhead, sweeping over France, Belgium and the Ruhr. Escort duty became offensive hunting. The concept of air superiority turned into daily routine. German formations dwindled, refineries burned, rail yards shattered. For the pilots, the new fuel felt like confidence itself. The throttle could stay forward longer, the climb could begin sooner, the dive recovery came with margin to spare. The difference between caution and aggression narrowed until it vanished. They flew as if invincible, not from arrogance but from data proven over the channel again and again. Meanwhile, ground crews learned the price. Purple fuel meant more lead in the plugs, more fouled valves, more frequent overhauls. Mechanics scraped grey deposits from cylinder heads, changed spark plugs after almost every sortie, and flushed lines with gloves on to avoid the poison that gave the fuel its power. They cursed the maintenance hours, then grinned when the pilots returned unscathed. By late summer, the secret was spreading. British Spitfire, Mark 14 and Hawker Tempests also drank the purple blend. Those Tempests became the terror of the V1 campaign, diving from the clouds at speeds that made even the robot bombs seem sluggish. Pilots who had once measured success in minutes now scored kills in seconds. The record books filled with names: Byron, Van Leerder, Beaumont, and with astonishing numbers of flying bombs destroyed. Across the Channel, the Luftwaffe struggled to respond. Their intelligence officers finally obtained samples of Allied gasoline from captured drop tanks. Laboratory tests confirmed their worst fears. The enemy's fuel could withstand pressures German refineries could not reproduce. The synthetic plants at Leuna and Pulitz, already crippled by bombing, could only dream of such consistency. Each raid that cratered a distillation tower or scattered workers pushed production further toward collapse. Even the most advanced German aircraft, the FW-190D, the Bf-109K, were constrained by what filled their tanks. Engineers tweaked superchargers, polished propellers, lightened airframes. None of it changed the fundamental equation. Chemistry was destiny, and the Reich was running out of both oil and time. Inside German cockpits, pilots began to feel the difference as humiliation. Veterans who had survived the Eastern Front now fought over their own cities and found themselves powerless. Fuel shortages meant fewer training hours for replacements. Flight time was rationed like bread. Some squadrons received just enough for one mission per week. Meanwhile, Allied fields in England never slept. Refineries back home fed an endless stream of tankers, and tankers fed the sky. Factories poured out P-51s faster than losses could consume them. The synergy of abundance created a rhythm that no beleaguered enemy could match. Combat statistics told the same story in colder language. Through the summer and fall of 1944, bomber losses dropped sharply while fighter victories climbed. Luftwaffe interception tactics, once based on swift slashing attacks followed by dives to safety, collapsed under the new pursuit speeds. Mustang pilots now dictated every engagement. When they chose to fight, they closed the distance. When they chose to disengage, they vanished behind superior acceleration. One German ace, interviewed decades later, remembered the moment realization set in. "We were no longer fighting men," he said. "We were fighting machines powered by something we could not make." That unseen something, the alchemy of tetraethyl lead and aromatic hydrocarbons, turned Allied cockpits into laboratories of applied chemistry. The purple liquid burned with a clean violence, feeding cylinders that transformed chemical bonds into thrust, thrust into advantage, advantage into survival. Winter 1944 brought new challenges. Weather grounded squadrons and froze runways, but the war of industry continued unseen. American plants refined millions more gallons of 150-grade gasoline. Convoys carried it through submarine-infested waters. Every drop represented man-hours, infrastructure, and faith that engineering could shorten the road to Berlin. In the air, the advantage persisted. Pilots reported climb rates increasing by hundreds of feet per minute, top speeds exceeding anything recorded a year before. When a Mustang armed with 6.50 caliber guns met a German fighter now, the outcome was almost predetermined. Dogfights that once danced across miles of sky ended in a single pass. German commanders faced impossible arithmetic. Even if they fielded new jets like the Me-262, fuel shortages strangled deployment. Training a jet pilot required kerosene that no longer existed in sufficient quantity. Every mission risked wasting irreplaceable fuel and engines. On the Allied side, the story was reversed. The supply seemed limitless. Between May 1944 and April 1945, the 8th Air Force alone consumed more than 53 million gallons of 150-grade fuel. Add the R, F, and the other American Air Forces, and total usage likely exceeded 200 million gallons. Each gallon travelled a supply chain that stretched from Gulf Coast refineries to Atlantic ports, across convoy routes, through British storage farms, and into fighter wings stationed on grass and concrete. It was industrial choreography at planetary scale, and it worked flawlessly. By the time Allied armies crossed the Rhine, the Luftwaffe was a ghost. Hangars stood full of aircraft with empty tanks. Training schools closed. Pilots who still wanted to fight found themselves grounded by bureaucracy and scarcity. The once fearsome organisation that had ravaged Europe in 1939 now rationed its last reserves for desperate sorties. In contrast, Allied squadrons rotated missions like clockwork. A P-51 might fly twice in one day, return, refuel, and launch again before sunset. Maintenance crews replaced plugs fouled by the heavy lead content, cleaned injectors, and sent the aircraft back up. Fatigue belonged to men, not machines. Psychology followed physics. German morale sank with every contrail overhead. Civilians looked up at silver formations and knew resistance was futile. Commanders at every level understood that air supremacy, once contested, had become absolute. The numbers are final and merciless. Between late 1943 and May 1945, American P-51 groups destroyed nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, and thousands more on the ground. The majority of those kills occurred after the introduction of 150-grade fuel. In the same period, German pilot training hours collapsed from hundreds to mere dozens. Skill could no longer compensate for deficiency. When General Doolittle's forces reached full strength in early 1945, the sky belonged entirely to the Allies. Sorties over Germany met little or no opposition. Bombers struck at will. Railways, refineries and factories vanished under waves of high explosives delivered by crews who flew there and back on the chemistry that had begun in a laboratory 5 years earlier. By April, Luftwaffe resistance was symbolic. Some pilots took off knowing they had enough fuel for only one engagement. Others chose to ram bombers rather than face capture. Jet squadrons like JG-7 managed sporadic successes, but they were footnotes against the tidal weight of production, logistics and purple gasoline. Then came May 8, 1945. Germany surrendered. The war in Europe ended with the Allies in uncontested control of the air. Historians would later cite strategy, numbers and bravery. Yet beneath all of those lay the quiet miracle of petroleum chemistry. The purple fuel was more than a technical footnote. It was proof that victory could be distilled, refined, and shipped in steel drums. It embodied a collaboration that spanned continents, scientists designing molecules, engineers perfecting catalysts, workers blending additives by the ton, sailors guarding convoys, mechanics fueling fighters. Each link mattered. In retrospect, the difference seems almost invisible. A few more inches of manifold pressure, a few dozen extra horsepower, a handful of miles per hour at altitude. But wars often pivot on such increments. When multiplied across thousands of sorties, that small advantage translated into command of the sky. After the war, surviving German engineers studied captured fuel samples and shook their heads in disbelief. The precision of Allied refining, the purity of the additives, the stability under load, all exceeded what their battered industry could have achieved even under ideal conditions. They realized too late that the conflict had been decided as much in laboratories as in dogfights. For Allied veterans, the memory was tangible. The smell of that fuel, sweet and metallic, the purple stains on gloves, the way engines felt alive when throttled forward. Many swore they could tell by ear when the mixture was right. A deeper growl, a cleaner surge. In post-war years, aviation moved on to jet engines and kerosene. The era of high-octane gasoline faded, and the colour purple disappeared from fuel depots. Yet its legacy endured. It demonstrated that industrial science could become strategy, that refinery chemists could alter the speed of victory. Today, when restored Mustangs roar at air shows, their engines burn modern unleaded fuel, but the sound still hints at what once was. Beneath that thunder lies a history written not in bullets or glory, but in molecules. The story of Grade 150 fuel is a lesson in invisible power. It teaches that dominance in the air does not begin in the cockpit. It begins wherever curiosity meets infrastructure. It begins in a beaker, in a refinery tower, in the conviction that even chemistry can be a weapon. When those purple-fueled fighters streaked across Europe in 1944, they carried more than ammunition. They carried proof that intellect, organization, and industry, when aligned, could rewrite the laws of possibility. Speed was not just motion. It was policy. It was morale. It was inevitability. And in that inevitability, the Luftwaffe found its end.